Follette is primary recall election day today.
Voters are deciding which Democrat will be on the ballot to take on Governor Scott Walker on June 5th. And political scientist and visiting Marquette Law School professor Charles Franklin joins us once again. Good to see you.
Hello, Charles.
Good to be here.
So what are you going to be watching tonight?
Mostly turnout. I think we've, the Government Accountability Board says 30 to 35% turnout. And it's an interesting question whether we have a really unusually high turnout for this race or not. To put it in a little perspective, in 2002 was the last time we had a competitive Democratic primary for governor, and that produced 550,000 votes statewide. In 2006, the Attorney General's race was the competitive Democratic primary, and that produced about 365,000 votes without a competitive governor's race, of course. And so somewhere between that 365 and 550 would be kind of normal competitive turnout. Do we go above that? Do we fall short? I think that's the main thing I'm looking for, aside from that small thing of who's ahead.
Well, the two main Democratic candidates, Tom Barrett and Kathleen Falk, what do they have to do tonight to be successful?
Both clearly need to win their bases by a large amount. So that means a big Falk margin in Dane County, a big Barrett margin, of course, in Milwaukee. And then we'll see what happens to the rest of the state. At least in our Marquette Law School poll, we haven't seen a whole lot of variation in support in the other regions of the state. Falk does better in the Dane County area, as you'd think, and Barrett better in the Milwaukee area. But the rest of the state doesn't show a real strong pattern of one being, particularly better for one candidate or the other. And so we'll see how that pattern works its way out.
And in that same poll, and in a race between Scott Walker and Tom Barrett, it's a virtual tie, but between Scott Walker and Kathleen Falk, he's got quite a lead.
It's a little bit of a lead. It's about a 7 or 6 point lead, depending. So it's not an enormous lead. And in fact, Barrett and Falk have polled not that differently from each other through most of the year. It's only been about a 2-point difference in the matchup versus Walker for Barrett versus Falk. That changed just a little bit. It got a bit bigger because of essentially a tie for Barrett right now and a 6 or 7 point advantage for Walker. So a little bit bigger more recently, but the bottom line is you see Democrats so mobilized behind any Democratic candidate, it makes the race competitive no matter who the nominee is. Though I think it's fair to say Barrett has some advantage, though it's not a gigantic one.
What about Kathleen Vinehout and Douglas Follette? Could they pull off an upset tonight?
Well, it would take quite a surprise to do it. They have rarely been out of single digits in both our polling and other polls statewide, so that would take really quite a surprise for them to surge to the front. But, it's election day. I would push the point that it doesn't matter what our public opinion polls show. It matters what the people that show up at their voting places say today. So with that fact that there's still some time to go, let's just encourage people to vote and not try to prejudge what the outcome's going to be tonight.
There's a Republican primary as well. Is this just a show of support for Governor Walker?
Well, there seems to be some real organization behind doing that. There are widespread reports of Republican groups urging their supporters to get out and vote for Scott Walker in the primary. Not, I'm sure, because they fear that he might lose, but because of the show of support and invigorated turnout. We'll see what happens on that in terms of total turnout. And I guess the one thing I would say is we often look at primaries as if they tell us something about the general, and they rarely do. A little bit about energy on each side, perhaps, but more about the competitiveness of the primary. And so these are tea leaves that are almost not worth reading if we're thinking that tonight's results tell us a lot about who's going to have an advantage in June. They do tell us about tonight. Where did the electorate go? How many turned out for it? And what's the regional distribution of that support? And I think all of that's worth looking for.
Tomorrow is a different story altogether. And you'll be with us again tomorrow, and we'll look at these results and we'll see what they mean.
Then we'll have some hindsight. Always valuable.
That's always valuable.
2020. Charles, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.